If you've ever thought to yourself, I'd rather just read about this than actually do it, you're not alone. The Enneagram 5 newsletter exists to help you move from knowing to experiencing. Every Saturday, you'll get insights designed to help fives grow without overwhelm. Sign up for free today at enneagram5.com/newsletter or visit the link in the description. Now on to the show. So Cody,
Hit me.
how many girlfriends have you had?
Oh, man. Almost as many as jobs I've had.
And I'm an Enneagram 5.
All right, well, tonight we're talking about commitment.
Yes.
Does
Commitment.
that make you sweat?
No. I'm interested because we were trying to figure out how to talk about commitment because we both have, long-term significant others at this point. You have kids and all the things and a job, and I have finally bit the bullet and am going to marry my significant other. So I feel like I'm coming along a
Don't
long
sound
way.
too excited about that.
I'm just saying, I think I've come a long way in
You have.
commitment,
Mm-hmm.
and in dealing with fear of commitment. And so it was kind of hard to decide on how we were going to talk about it until we started until we got into subreddits and started reading about how other people are not dealing with it. And I was like, okay, we got some stuff to talk about.
Yeah, I'll say that for us, each of us in our own way has grown so much around commitment at this point that it's hard to remember in vivid detail what it was like before.
Yeah.
Not to say that it wasn't a big problem for each of us before.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's so much so that, reading other people's stories made me realize a lot about my story and how what I would have considered just inconsistent behavior was probably just me getting too drained. And so whoever I was with at the time being just pulling out too much energy and I needed space. And so I'd break up with them and then 2 weeks later be like, oh, actually, I don't hate you. I thought we were actually pretty good together. And then we get back together and do this whole back and forth thing. And that's never good for relationships. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that I think that the consensus around fives and commitment and the issues that we have with it goes back to the energy management and the core fear of the world asking more of us than we have to give.
Yeah, for sure. I read something really cool actually when I was looking up trying to figure out what I was going to say in this conversation. That somebody said, I can't remember which website it was, but they said that fives, whether they realize it or not, take inventory of the energy they have to spend that day every morning when they wake up and start divvying it up on where it's going to go. And so things like, maybe a spouse or significant other who decides and makes plans without their knowledge, without the five's knowledge, just deciding we're going to be doing these things with these people, that can be something that's super jarring and unsettling because I didn't allot time for that. I didn't allot energy for that. I had a certain amount of energy and I don't have that energy for this. So now you have to either decide, can I muster the energy? Can I find it and dig down deep and make it happen? Or am I going to be mad about it? So, I have done both scenarios many times in my life. So, but yeah,
More the latter than the former, probably.
The digging down deep?
No, getting mad about it.
Oh, getting mad about it? Yeah. Yeah. Well, nowadays it's digging down deep and finding what energy that I still have, what I have still left in the tank at the end of the day when plans are made with, parents or other things and other friends. And it was like, oh, we're actually going out and doing these things tonight because it's somebody's birthday or something. And I'm like, well, why didn't we talk about this? Because I now have to find an entire day's worth of energy to go out and deal with 7 people at once in public. So yeah, it's no matter how much I love them, doesn't matter. It's just energy.
Yeah, I'm curious how you kind of got to the point where you were ready to ask Madison to marry you.
You're not curious. You know the story.
No, I mean more from like the commitment angle.
Oh, okay. Well,
But you can share the story too.
yeah. Well, so
I think it's relevant to this conversation.
it is. Yeah. Well, it's something else that I read was that that Enneagram Fives commit mentally before they commit emotionally.
Yes, 100%.
And when I read that, and I was like, "Oh shit, yep, that's me." Yeah. So I think I committed in the beginning of our relationship. I committed mentally before I did emotionally. I knew I had run the numbers, decided that the information was valid, that I did not want my life to be without her, so I should commit. It made sense. It was like a
Logical reasoning. Yeah.
like a formula, right?
Yeah.
And with this formula in my head now, all the pieces fit. Everything was there. I had it from beginning to end. Everything made sense to me. So it's like, okay, we can run this. run this program, right? And so I think that, and in many ways, that's kind of how I decided to get married too. In this, when I've talked about it before, I was married before. That was like me fully disintegrated into a 7, acting impulsively, all emotional, like not being in touch with myself or what I thought I needed or wanted at all. And I got myself into a terrible situation, and we're both parties involved not happy. And so this time around, I think I wanted to obviously do it differently because I've been with her for, 6 years? Very different than the 3 months I was with the other person before. I still, when I say it out loud, I just can't believe I did it. I just can't believe I was dating somebody for 3 months and then got engaged, and then 3 months later also got married. Like, that is the epitome of what I would never do. Like me now, I just, if somebody came up to me and said they were doing it, I'd be like, no, you're wild. No, there's something wrong. Like, we need to take you to a doctor. There's something severely wrong with this situation. And so I think that for me, to look back on that and then compare it to now, yeah, I was 100% mentally calculating whether it was the right decision or not before I emotionally felt it. And I think that I had just decided too that we've been together long enough. I may always make a joke. I was like, well, I mean, I put her on my life insurance policy, so it was probably time to get married. But yeah, so at that point, I decided it was probably actually too late. Like, it should have already happened. So that was something that I decided a long time ago. I was okay to get married again. So it was, and I think I've actually said this before, where it progressed throughout our relationship where it's like, well, if I'm going to date anybody, I'd probably date Madison. And then it's like, well, if I'm going to get married to anybody, I'd probably get married to Madison. And now it's like, if I'm going to have kids with anybody, it'd probably be with Madison. It's like, but it's all logical first. And then later, I think I allow myself to feel the emotion and the excitement of it after I've made the decision, which is very strange. And I don't know if anybody else can relate to that, but it's like I didn't feel excited about getting married until I already asked the question and she already said yes. And now she's literally in the other room right now because we're recording in a different place, recording in my place tonight. She's in the other room right now planning. And so, she just told me that a few minutes ago, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool." And then afterwards, I was thinking about it. I was like, "I'm actually kind of excited about it. Like, it's a good thing. It's a positive and happy thing." And
by the way, you've never officially asked me to be your best man.
Oh, so we're gonna do this now?
What better time?
Josiah Gabriel Goff.
Yeah, throwing out the middle name. Wow. Yeah.
We're doing it for real formal since we're on in front of an audience of whoever knows how many. Will you be my best man?
I don't know if I can commit to that.
Why did I know? You were setting me up for that. I knew that was going to...
Oh, yes, I do. I do, Cody.
I'm so happy. I had no idea what you would say.
That's the fun of these.
I mean, I knew you were going to say yes because you've been hounding me about being my best man before I asked.
If we haven't mentioned this before, Cody was my best man.
Yes.
Like 13 years ago. And I've been waiting.
And you've never gotten to be anybody's best man.
No, I had like 11 groomsmen. And I've never been anyone's best man. And I'm like, I'm on the edge of the window.
Well, the other 10 of them you've known way longer than you've known me, and I was your best man, so that's why you weren't their best man. You offended them.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah. So anyway, well, so that's all happening, and I'm excited about it, and now I can feel the excitement about it, but also too, like, yeah, things are going to change, like it always does. It doesn't matter how long you're together. As soon as you get married, a switch flips and everything changes. And so, am I a little bit afraid of that change? Of course, yeah, a little bit. But again, it's if I'm going to go through it with anybody, I'm going to go through it with her. So,
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back to when Amy and I got together. Thinking back on it now, we mentioned this a bit in the religion episode, but I used to be terrified of not following God's will.
Oh man.
And so like my whole life revolved around trying to figure out what it was that I was supposed to be doing, that God wanted me to do, so that I wouldn't be doing the wrong thing. And I'm realizing, I've sort of come to the conclusion over the years as I've gotten to know myself better that it was probably more of a fear. Like the fear was based in if I didn't do God's will and I did the wrong thing. So the only thing that I could do long term that would be energizing for me would be God's will. So like if I did the wrong thing, then I was committing to something that was going to drain me for the rest of my life.
Oh my God.
I'm realizing that's the logic I had sort of twisted myself into. And that's how I spent years of my life, man. And so I didn't want to commit to anything because I just wasn't sure that it was God's will. There was like just a few things where I thought I heard God talking to me, and it was easy to commit to because of that.
Yeah, I feel like, as long as the religion episode was, it's crazy to me to think right now how much we could have talked about how fives and religion like not coincide, but they
conflict,
and how, because religion affects everybody differently, but it affects fives in a very specific way that I think we could have talked about, and we didn't even touch on that. And that could almost be in a part 2 episode because of how much did that mask our fiveness? How much did it, how much did we and also how much did we use religion as a cop out, or things to mask for other people, like our true intentions and our true energy.
We conspired with religion.
I was thinking of it more like a tool in a tool bag, but yeah, sure.
I value integrity very much, and when someone's committing to something or someone, I trust they would fulfill the promises. I want to keep myself to the same high standards, so I try not to take too much commitment on me, if possible. Just don't like to disappoint. On the other hand, I don't want to be too attached or committed to my ideas and opinions. I'd like to be able to change them when the new information arrives.
So I'm trying to think back when Amy and I finally got together. It's kind of weird. I was in a very strange place in my life where I had just broken free of that fear. I had just gotten out of the phase of my life where, I had just gotten over that fear. And I realized for the first time in my life that, hey, I can actually be friends with girls and just genuinely want to get to know someone without any ulterior motive. And it was awesome. And I I don't know. I was just sort of in this state of being where I wasn't overthinking anything. I was just enjoying life in the moment. And it just worked. And because I was in that state, that's what attracted Amy to me, because she didn't want anything to do with me when we first met.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, and I don't blame her. And but I had changed. And she saw that in me around 6 months after it happened. And it just sort of happened. Like I really didn't even think about it. It made sense without me even having to think about it. Like I didn't do any calculation. I didn't think about it at all, really. It was just like, oh, this is it.
Well, and when you guys got together, it felt very it felt much more whimsical and romantic
It was,
than my version. So, and everything you did was like big gestures, and you were very romantic. That's the 4-wing in you.
Strong 4-wing. And
she's a 4.
She's a 4-wing 5. Yeah. So yes, we got caught up in the romance of it for sure. But at the same time, I opened up a savings account for a ring the day before we officially started dating. Like I knew.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about that. That's wild.
I knew. And the only reason why, so we got engaged 8 months after we started dating, which was like a month after we went on our first date. Mm-hmm. And then we got married, I think like 8 or 9 months after that. And really it was just timing of different things that pushed those dates out. It wasn't because I wasn't ready. I just wanted to get some stuff in place for like the proposal and and then we had to push the date back for the wedding a couple of times as we were preparing for different schedules. We wanted it to happen when her brother was home on leave.
Right. Yeah.
And so but if it wasn't for all of that, like it probably would have been like a 3 month after we started dating sort of deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it worked. And not to say that we haven't had our really rough times, because everybody has, but we're committed to each other.
That's good.
Yeah. And I wake up every day adding her and the kids to my calculation. Like they're the initial inputs into that calculation of how much energy I have.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's kind of like your default, right? Like you don't even start calculating until after it's like bills. They already taken out. It's like auto draft energy to your kids and wife. Before this relationship, I used to plan out all of my days, even if it was subconscious. Like even if I was planning for nothing, you know what I mean? Like planning for nothing evenings where I get to do whatever I want and, play video games or watch TV or whatever the thing is. Go to a movie theater, as we've talked about. I'm sure that's one of my favorite things. And when I was with other people in my life, if they tried to overbook me, double book me with my own mind, I was not okay with it. I would get angry, or I'd get like irritated and just like feel like, oh, this person is demanding way too much of me. Like it's just too much. And I'm sure that was on a subconscious level. I'm sure I was pulling away and like trying to get distance and trying to find my space again and all that kind of thing. But now, it's a different ball game. So you have to muster the energy and decide that, okay, well, because this person is important to me, I will somehow make the space and the time. Now, if I get into the middle of it and I shut down, I think that Madison also has a pretty good understanding of, oh, okay, he's done. Like it's time to go home, or it's time. It's kind of funny, but our dog Sam does that. If there was Enneagram for dogs,
Enneagrams for dogs,
because like Gus would
new Instagram account,
yeah. Gus would 100% be like extroverted, like really bubbly, like he's an 8, probably a 7. No, he's a 7, definitely a 7. But Sam is a 5, because every time we take him out, he'll be like all right with it for a little while, and then all of a sudden he just sits there stoic and starts looking at the door. It means he's ready to go home. And then he pulls you all the way home, goes and jumps in bed and goes to sleep without you. Like he's like, I'm done with this day. I'm done with you. And I relate to that so much. Every time he does it, because sometimes he'll do it like, local bar across the street. I'll play there sometimes. And she would bring him. She doesn't bring him anymore because every time 3 songs in, he's like, I'm ready to go home.
That's just your music. It's not.
Yeah. Just don't like to hear me sing. But he comes home, it's like he's overstimulated. He wants to go straight to bed. And he jumps in our bed by himself in there with the lights out. And he'll do that when people are in the apartment too. I've gone way too long talking about my dog, but I'm trying to make a point here, which is that I do that all the time. Like sometimes we'll have an apartment full of people hanging out and talking, and just there's certain times where I'm just like, I'm done. But then that's one of the things that I hate about having people over at our place. Everybody always wants to come to our place, and I have no control over when they leave. Yeah. Whereas like if I go somewhere else, I have control over when I'm going to leave. So yeah, I'm not too worried about any of my friends hearing this. I've told all of my friends multiple times to listen to our podcast, and none of them ever do. So this will be the test. If they listen to this episode, they'll tell me, I'm sure.
It's not like you wouldn't say this to their face anyway.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, definitely. I would say it. Well, they know. I think everybody knows at this point that I have a pretty hard cutoff, and when it happens, everyone knows. I've talked about it before where, Madison had to explain it to her parents so that they didn't think I was being rude. Also, I think some of that might be a little bit Asperger's too, though. Like that's a whole other thing, which we haven't talked about on the podcast yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if for those who are not a part of our premium podcast audience. Yeah, I recently, in between the last 2 seasons, somebody, one of you who listens to this podcast and is in the psychology world, reached out and said that I should be tested. Because they thought I might be on the spectrum after listening to all of the episodes, and which I think is hilarious and amazing. And apparently that's a pretty common thing. So I got tested, and turns out I scored very high, like through the roof, and having Asperger's. So here we are. So I think that may be a little bit of it's all of the things combined with sensory overload, but that can affect my commitment. I think it does a little bit, or at least affects the appearance of commitment or fear of commitment. You know what I mean? Like it may not even be commitment a lot of the time, but sometimes I just am done with the situation, and I need to remove myself from it. And sometimes I think that might be communicated to other people as like a fear of commitment, and maybe I'm just like done with that particular situation. It's like circumstantial. It's not actually like philosophical. It's not my commitment issues. And so to pull back all the layers of the onion of whether or not it's commitment or Asperger's, that's like a whole conversation we could have, I guess. Because I don't know if I've ever, when I know that I want to do something, I have no problem committing to it, you know? And I think that, and I think I have to talk about my life a lot of the time on this podcast. I have to talk about like pre-podcast or post-podcast starting, right? Because we've talked about it a lot of times. Like the moment that I decided I'm all in on this podcast, my whole life changed in terms of how I viewed it. And so commitment was no longer the thing that I determined whether or not I was going to do something or not.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably unfair to say. I do that all the time in small ways throughout the day on how much time and energy I actually have to commit to something. But when it's a project that I really want to do, I somehow we find the energy, we find the time. You didn't want to do this episode tonight.
I didn't want to. I texted you this morning and said, "Hey, I don't. I'm so not up for recording."
Yeah, you were like, "Can we just hang out instead?" And I was like, "Yeah, but we really got to start recording." Luckily, I felt, because I feel like we almost didn't get our season planned when we were hanging out a couple weeks ago for the same reason. We thought we were just going to hang out, and I was like, we gotta do things though.
And then I sent you that GIF of April from Parks and Rec, and I was like, I do not want to do things. I want to not do things.
Yes. If there was ever a tattoo you were going to get.
Yes. Totally.
I don't know why I'm talking so much. I feel like you have so many more probably commitment anecdotes in your life.
Oh man,
in the daily life, like small moments of commitment phobia.
Yeah, for me, it's I go back to if I had known the level of commitment required before having kids, I would have not chosen that. And I technically didn't really choose it. I just did not choose it,
Right.
We've talked about that on the parenting episode.
You kept acting accordingly.
Right. But it's one of those things that that's one of the first times I really understood the power of commitment, not just for what I'm committing to, but for myself. Because once I sort of worked through my stuff initially, first time I found out I was a dad, which we talked about on the parenting episode, I was all in, and it changed me. And I did all the things, you know. I changed all the diapers, and I bounced on a fucking exercise ball for hours, way into the late night, early morning, trying to get him to feel better. And there's so many things that I did that I was 100% in, and I got at least at the time, like nothing in return for that. But I have the most precious relationship with my kids because, and I wouldn't give that up for anything. And I struggle sometimes because I think that sometimes I commit to too many things now.
Yeah.
And which was never a problem for me before. I just didn't want to do anything. And now I have so many ideas, and I realize that I have the power of commitment. I can follow through on them. But then I'm like, oh yeah, let's do this. And then I'm like, oh wait, but if I say yes to this, then I have to say no to these 5 other things that I've also committed to. So now what do I do? And then I've been really drained, especially lately, because 2022 was a hard year for us.
Yeah.
A lot happened, and we talked about that in season 3, and I'm thankful for it. And we've grown a lot, all of us in the family, but it was hard. And, you know, my health isn't what it used to be. And I'm working to get my energy back. And so now when the kids ask me to play freeze tag in the backyard, I say no more than I say yes. And that kills me.
Yeah.
But I have learned that when I don't think that I can, and when I don't think I have the energy left, I always really have more. It's more of a mental block if I'm telling myself that I don't, you know?
Right. Which is really it's kind of the point of this conversation, I guess. You're kind of coming around to kind of full circle this idea that, and I think we've actually touched on this before in previous episodes, but the energy component is a figment of our imagination.
Mostly, yes.
Mostly,
yes.
You know, a lot more than we want to admit. And I think it is our cop-out. It's our way of getting out of things. It's our way of getting out of the things we think we don't want to do or whatever. But it's also our way of giving into fear of what might happen if we do the things that are risky or the things that are that require more of us than we have given before. And I think that's the fear of commitment tends to be it's a web of connectedness to other fears. It's the other fears of whether or not if we feel like we are competent to do the thing. If we're, you know, I feel like it has to connect to those things to some degree. It drives a lot of that. Our core fears. It's not just commitment. It's always commitment and.
Yeah. One of the things that I mentioned a minute ago is the power of commitment when you do commit. That's been one of my biggest lessons over the last 5 or 6 years is what commitment can do for you. So moving away from like relationships and parenting and all of that, there's so many ways in which I was not committing to things. And we've talked about before with the creativity, it took me a while to accept that I am a creative person because I always had all these ideas of things that I wanted to do. And I would research the hell out of them. I knew how to do a lot of things. I know a little bit about a lot of things. and I've bought more domain names than I will ever do anything with. Like I've bought, dozens of domain names for ideas that I've had of websites to build, projects to work on. And I could always see myself doing things and enjoying them until I went to actually start to take action on them. And the second I hit resistance, because everything is hard, once you actually put it into action, like it takes effort. And I immediately would fold and I would make up excuses for not pushing through on it. And so I never actually got anywhere with all the things that I wanted to do. And then of course I felt like I was lazy, felt like a failure. The things in my life that I was successful with came out of just sheer necessity of being in survival mode, and like my different jobs that I've had, and how I was able to, quote unquote, move up the ladder in different ways was really just because we were desperate and I needed to make more money and I had to figure it out.
Yeah.
And so that's how that happened. But I still, even with my jobs, I would get in and I would start to get bored, and then I would see what it would be required of me if I stayed at a job long term. And I'm like, I don't have that in me. I'm going to start looking something else, because I could ride that wave of the sort of initial wave of the learning curve, of the excitement. Like that's what got me through. But once that wore off, all I saw ahead of me was just this slog,
Yeah.
And now I'm at a place where this is the first time I have ever been at a job that I could see myself in long term, like 5-10 years plus. And that's saying something for me, because I've never hit the 3-year mark. I just passed the 2-year mark at my current job, and
Wow.
I've never hit the 3-year mark at any job that I've had. And it's a direct result of the transformation that I've gone through over the last 5 or 6 years. And a big part of that was like changing my stories around commitment and what commitment means, and what it requires of me, and what it does for me. And one of the lessons that I learned from a mentor of mine is that 100% committed is easy. 99% committed is hard.
Huh. Okay.
And I think that's going back to how fives tend to approach commitment. If we commit mentally first, that's not really 100% committed, because we're not committing with all of ourselves, And it's great if we can get over onto the emotional side. But I'm thinking back to the times when I committed and it was easy, and it's because I committed emotionally first. For whatever reason, even if I didn't realize that that's what I was doing, I was just like all in, and I didn't do any math. I didn't do any like calculation in my head. It was just like, oh yeah, this is it. I'm in. And I just jumped in and figured it out, and it was easy. And I'll give an example of that. My last podcast that I did before this one, I'd heard about this idea of finding solutions in dream time. So it's this idea of like before you go to bed, you ask your unconscious mind a question, and then you let it work on it like while you're sleeping. And then you're supposed to get like the answer the next day. And so I thought, so supposedly John Lennon said this is how he got the lyrics to Imagine.
Okay, that's awesome.
And a lot of artists and scientists, like I think Einstein was another one who did this sort of thing.
Okay.
And so I thought, well, this sounds interesting, so
Yeah.
I think I'll try it. And
At the very least, it's a nice little literal thought experiment.
Yeah, right. And I'd wanted to do a podcast for a long time, and this one was, I was running my own business at the time, and so the idea behind it was that I wanted to have like a funnel for getting clients from my business that I was running. So I had the idea of a podcast, and I set my intention before I went to bed, asked the question of basically like, what should the podcast be? And I woke up the next morning and had nothing. But then this was the time when I was like every day was doing self-hypnosis and meditation, that sort of stuff. And so I did my morning session, and I didn't even think about it anymore at that point, but I did my morning session. And as soon as I came out of that, it was like a download in my brain. This is what the podcast is. This is the positioning. This is the name of the podcast. These are the first steps that you need to take. And I was like, oh, I'm all in. And
It's like your limitless pill.
It's so crazy. And I went from that moment idea to having my podcast live with 3 episodes of guest interviews in like 3.5 weeks.
What? I thought you were going to say months.
No, 3.5 weeks,
Holy
man.
shit.
And I knew nothing about how to do any of this.
That's wild.
And it was just like I was in, and it was so easy, and it was so much fun.
Yeah.
And I've only experienced that level of things with like 2 or 3 things in my life. It's not been a lot.
Yeah.
And But when I do, man, it's just awesome. And that podcast changed my life because one, it got me, it made me realize how much I love podcasting. And it's the reason why we're having this show now. Everything I learned about podcasting, I learned from experimenting with that show. I made so many relationships I had like hardly any connections at all. I didn't really know anybody, especially like in the market that I was trying to. So the podcast was called Content Heroes, and I was wanting to interview content creators and content marketers who were really successful and understand how they did what they did. I didn't really know anyone. And so like my very first interview was with a friend of mine who had started a podcast and it's like this really niche, like real estate tech, and it ended up being successful. And so I asked him how he did it. And then he told me exactly like everything I needed to do in that episode. So I just took what he told me to do and then like did it. And within a couple of months, I was interviewing. I was sitting down and interviewing, having a conversation for an hour with some of my marketing heroes. Like people that should have never given me the time of day based off of like, I was nobody.
Right.
But I was able to sit down and have these amazing conversations and basically get like a lot of free coaching and mentoring from them and asking whatever questions that I wanted but did it in a way that we were both getting value out of it and everyone listening was getting value out of it. And I just fell in love. I did like 60 episodes almost, I think, with that podcast. And I just fell in love with the whole format. And I was planning on continuing with it. I took a break at the end of 2020 because it had been a really long year. And that's when we were like, hey, why don't we just sit down and try to record an episode of this and see how it goes? And then we did that. And I was like, oh, that was another moment where I was like, oh, this is the thing. This is what I need to be doing right now. And I just never picked up the other podcast again. I think I will at some point. Yeah. But like I committed I committed on like every level first, and everything just fell into place. And I have this analogy, the way that I like to think about how this works. And let's say you're standing on the shore and this old man comes up next to you and he points out to the horizon and he says, see that out there at the horizon, that little speck, that's an island. And on that island, if you reach that island, you get everything you'll ever want in life. All you have to do is get out there. And then next he says, I have a rowboat for you. You can take this rowboat and you can take it to the island. You're like, this is awesome. This is what I've been waiting for. So you hop in the rowboat and at first, you're going full steam. And after a couple of hours, your muscles start getting sore, but you're like, I can keep doing this. Like I've got it. And you row and you row and you row and you're out there for, 8 hours. And you're like, oh man, I've got to be getting close. And then you look back at the shore, like that shore is not very far away. And you look out on the island, you're like, I don't feel like I've made any progress at all. And all of a sudden, the doubts start creeping in. And every row you take after that gets harder and harder and harder because you've got the shore calling to you. And you start getting in your head and thinking about all the reasons why this is not going to work. And the next thing you know, you're headed back to shore. You're never going to get there. Yeah. So that's scenario one. That's how I approached commitment most of my life. There's another scenario, which is you get in a helicopter and you get dropped off in the middle of the ocean. All right. Before you do, you're told, hey, there's an island out there and it has everything you want. It's at the horizon. All you got to do is swim to it. All right. So you just start swimming. And some point along the way, a guy comes by and says, hey, I've got this extra rowboat. Do you want a rowboat? You're going to get in the rowboat and you're going to be super grateful for it. And you're not going to even think about how far you've come or how far away land is because there's no land in sight. All you see ahead of you is the island. And that's how I think about commitment, where when you're 100% committed, there is no shore. Like the boats have been burned. If to use a different analogy, it's probably not a good analogy to mix with this one, but you know what I mean? Like there's no going back.
Right.
And if you can at your core, recognize that, that's how I've been able to identify in those moments of, am I 100% committed? I think about, is there a shore that I'm still thinking about? In my mind, have I left an exit way for myself? Have I left something for me to, like an off ramp? Because you're always going to hit that point where you feel like you can't keep going. And if you have that shore to go back to, even if you do keep going, it's just going to be harder, right? And so that's by sort of my mental trick of figuring out, like, am I 100% committed? How do I get there? And when I have been able to get there, like, it's been a breeze, and things just fall into place.
I don't know if it's a purely five thing, but I know that I tend to overcommit. There are so many opportunities that I want to do. I want to work on myself. I want to learn new skills. And so I end up signing up for way more than I should. And I am so committed to the commitment I made that it's really, really hard for me to realize, hey, I really need to back off. I need to take a few things off my plate. I need to focus on one or two things and make those really great skill sets for me personally. I've realized also that it really stresses me out as I've realized that other people are not as committed as I am. And it really bugs me and bothers me that people can make a promise and not keep it, or be very slow to fulfill the commitment, even committing to replying to a question I have and working with me in a group project. Group projects are the absolute worst. All my life, they have been the absolute worst.
That's really interesting. I think that that's definitely, it's definitely applicable to me now in my life. I think that if I could, again, I'm doing exactly what your analogy, and well, exactly what you kind of just decided, you said that you shouldn't do is look back. But like, if I could go back to like 16-year-old me with all of the dreams and hopes and ambitions that I had to be what I wanted to be, and like grab that me by the shoulders and say, all right, this is what you got to do. Stop with all this other shit. Focus on this. Go all in. Nothing else matters. Just this. Just go for it. Don't look back. Yeah, probably be it's a whole different story, whole different narrative. The version that I'm living now is me being 36 and not 16 and going, you know what? People can still be musicians and artists in their 40s. Because they can. People all the time don't even get famous until their 40s.
Well, yeah, that's when you actually have something to write songs about.
That is true. That is something that, yeah, for sure. I don't know how much I've talked about the project that I'm trying to get going in this next year on this podcast. But I think that I finally have a set of songs that I'm telling a story that I'm excited about and that I think is compelling enough that it's worth doing, you know. But for me to, I don't know if the songs matter as much as it is me believing in myself enough to go, you know what, I'm doing this. Like, this is what's going to happen. So like you're kind of the you're the presence in my life that helps me overcome resistance since the podcast started. Really, I mean, you're that person.
Which is funny given the conversation we described this morning, where you were making me come here tonight to.
Yeah. It's like you got us into this. I'm going to get us out.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, it's but I think that commitment is such a bigger conversation when you really start putting a magnifying glass on it and start looking at the different decisions that we make every single day, and how I think fives can waste more time than other Enneagram types in a day. I don't know if that's true. I'm completely talking out of my ass right now. I know that today I wasted so much time because I intentionally wanted to. Yeah. And it was 3:00 and I was like, shit, I haven't done anything today. I need to get ready for tonight. I need to do all these things. And it was just because I was laying in bed with the dogs. I just didn't want to do anything. And so I also know that in literally a week from today, as we're recording this podcast, I'm starting my new job. So it's like I've been out of a job for 2 months. Oh no. Yeah. 2.5 months, almost 3 months.
I made the joke on our After Hours, our premium podcast, of the whole reason why you got a job was that we started planning season 4, and you have to have one job per season. So we're going to have to wait like a couple years for season 5 so that you don't have to get another job.
Yeah, for sure. Or I'm gonna break the curse because I consider that a curse. I need to stay in a job longer than a year. We'll see how the economy lasts. But yeah, I think that part of that is me just procrastinating and not wanting to do things on my last week of freedom. But I don't know how many other people, maybe everybody wastes this much time in a day, but I can waste so much time in a day. And a lot of the time it's just because, I don't know, I think it's so easy to just kind of let life pass us by. And as fives, we live so much in our heads and everything goes on around us. And it's like, oh shit, I'm 40. Like,
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this a lot lately about how much time has passed and how
40 is not far away for us.
No, 4 years, 4 quick years, and we will be 40, and well beyond the middle of our life, and most likely. And so I think, at least me,
Well, that's dark.
I'm just saying, I got 2 sides of the family with terrible genes, so we'll see. But I'm also speaking from a place where a person who used to be a dear friend of mine who just turned. He was 39. He died a few days ago. So of brain cancer. I think it was brain cancer. And so, it's been on my mind a lot lately of like, I knew him when he was my age, and he was just like 5 years older than me or even younger. And it's like, I'm sure he thought he had a family and 2 kids. Like he thought that he was going to live until he was, so I don't know. It's so cliche and cheesy to say, but like, we literally don't know how long we are actually here. And I feel like commitment to the things that we actually care about and trying to see if it actually works or not, and just finding out by doing it, is a much richer life and a better experience to live than living in our heads and wondering and dreaming about it happening or not. I think that that's so easy to do, and I feel like we've talked about this in different kind of from different perspectives and different vantage points, but yeah, I mean, that's just definitely where I'm at right now. You talk about like not looking back, but I think that there is a part of looking back that's really important, because seeing, if it's not to go back, but it's to see how far you've come, I think that that's a very positive thing and can be, really helpful. I was talking to my friend recently about how he was telling me a story that I won't say on this podcast, but he was telling me a story about his current life and things that he was doing in his life. And I just stopped and was like, wait a minute. Think about this for a second. Like almost a year ago in like February, we were camping in a van, and all weekend long you were complaining to me about how you wanted to be this person. You didn't know how to be this person. You were just coming out of this huge phase in your life and, getting a divorce and all these things. And like, you just didn't know how to like move on with your life. Look at you now. Like, think about the person then and what that you would think about you now, just like 9-10 months later. Like, I bet you never thought you'd be here. And he stopped and he was like, that's a really beautiful thing. I'm really happy that you brought that up. He was like, man, I never would have thought about that. But yeah, that's really great. I love that. Because he was kind of starting to go into this spiral again about how he wasn't sure like where he was. And I'm like, you've come so far. Like, I see it. I'm looking at these mile markers in your life. And he was just like, you're the only person I know in my whole life who does that, who like looks at these mile markers and looks at how far you've come in such a short amount of time. And I was like, it's literally the thing that keeps me going. It's the thing that I'm not looking back at this point in my life. I'm not looking back at the shore and going, how much should I go back? It's me going, wow, look how far I've actually swam. Like, maybe that island's still far away, but I've come this far. Like, I didn't think that I'd make it here. So that's great. I'll just keep going.
Yeah. I will say, alongside that, we've talked about commitment to things like projects and jobs and that sort of stuff. But commitment to friendships is also a huge thing. And the fact that we are still friends after all of these years, despite all the shit that we give each other.
In so many different aspects too, which we'll probably end up exploring this season because of some of the things on our board up there. But yeah, I think that commitment to friendships is definitely a big part of all of this. It's in the fact that we get to be here. And, you know, there's many times in our friendship that we could have stopped talking. We were both, you know, whether it was emotionally or physically distant, you know, that's as life happens and things happen. And, you know, the easiest friendships are the proximity friends, right? They're always the ones that are right near you. We have so many friends literally in our apartment complex right now. And they're almost like best friends by default. You know, it's not really like they didn't necessarily earn. Well, I won't say they didn't earn it. Some of Madison's friends definitely earned it. Which I won't go into, but they definitely earned it. And
I'm laughing because I know what he's talking about.
Yeah, it's a lot. But you know, sometimes we earn it, and sometimes we are friends because we're around each other a lot. But sometimes that's where the best friendships can be born. I mean, that's how we started. Honestly, you know, we met because of close proximity, and then we chose close proximity.
A little too close.
A little too close as two fives, strangers essentially living in the same household. And that could have been the end of our friendship. It could have easily for both sides, probably. I don't even remember really, but I remember certain memories that I've talked about on this podcast. And so, but I think the very purposeful decision to move forward anyway, because we do have like these certain set of things that we connect on, or we can build on. And of course, you know, I feel like there was a time where I was somewhat friends with Amy before you guys were together, because I met her kind of around the same time you did. But like you getting together with her in the beginning, I was like, oh yes, cool, this makes sense. Two people that I know, you know. I was obviously way more friends with you by that point, but I have a separate friendship with Amy that just coincides with yours. You know, like it would be really devastating to me to stop talking to you today, because it would feel like I would be losing two friendships, not just one. And so I think that's really well. And now with your family, with kids too, like obviously I'm close to your kids, so like that would be devastating on multiple levels. But and that's honestly, in some times, that's kind of what keeps me going, you know, like we've had some moments where we get into it a little, and it's like, you know, at the end of the day, we're more family than friends, I think, at this point.
I agree. Yeah.
We're family that we have chosen. I'm not just going to let that go over some silly little whatever that we get into. And so I think that's what's kept us going to this point, and now we're better than ever, I would think. And so and being able to go into this next year together, doing projects that I'm more excited about than I've ever done in my whole life it's rewarding. It's something that takes commitment to do, and to a level of commitment that I've never experienced really. And to be committing on all levels in my life right now is terrifying. I feel like I'm committing to too much, but I also know that it's the kind of too much that I want that challenge. I want to try to overcome that wave, you know? And so, it's going to be a fun year of trying to navigate getting married, coming out with a book with you, or starting that project, at least coming out with my own project while you're coming out with your own project, also doing this podcast.
Okay. So I guess the big takeaway is that the stories we have around commitment being scary or asking more of us than we have to give are just that, they're stories. And that if we can learn how to commit, or to the degree that we can learn how to commit on all levels and not just mentally first, the easier commitment becomes and the more powerful it becomes in our lives.
Well, and I think even more so than that too, I think that
that point wasn't good enough for you. This is the shit that we're talking about where Cody's like, oh my God, just get this guy out of here.
I'm going to post something in the community where you get to hear just how annoying he was in rehearsals when we used to play music together for a brief time. I just found it and was able to digitize it. So it was on a 20-year-old hard drive. So it's going to be great.
It's beautiful.
It's real great. I just showed it to you tonight before the episode, before we hit record. But no, to add on to your point, now I'm not even sure if I remember it. I had a good point.
I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was great. So much better than my point that I was making.
Not better. Add on to. I just should not have said more so. I'm sorry. I think that it's important to know that, or important to, hopefully you're inspired by our stories, right? And inspired by what we're trying to do in our life right now as essentially nobodies, right? Just trying to make something that lasts longer than we do, essentially, is all I think about when I think about music and art and the things that we create. It's that if hopefully it's good enough and people like it enough that it spreads and is the legacy that we can leave after we're gone, and that lasts longer than we do, has a longer lifespan than we do. And I think there's something beautiful to that. And I think that that applies to a lot of different areas in life where if we live in our heads all the time and we let life pass us by, then the only thing that we have is the dreams that we came up with that nobody ever knew. And I guarantee all of you who are listening to this that I bet you have a lot of cool shit going on in your head that the rest of the world should know about. And so hopefully you're inspired by this, because at the end of the day, we can't like tell you to commit to things. Like, I don't think that there's anything that we
doesn't
can
work that way.
say or do. Yeah. It's like the movie Inception. Like, if you've seen that, I think that we can't plant the idea in your head. You have to come up with it yourself. So hopefully something in this this episode has sparked something within you that says, hey, maybe commitment ain't so bad. Let's get over this fear and see what happens. And because I would love to hear those stories, and I'd love to hear what you guys do with your own life and your own narrative, and that's beyond what we're doing. So, yeah.
That was a really great point, Cody. I'm glad you shared it.
I'm glad I found it after you tried to wreck it.
And that's a wrap.
And that's a wrap. See you next time.
Hey, it's Josiah, and I wanted to say thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode and you're the type of person who likes helping others, would you do us a favor and share it with other people like you? If you found value in this conversation, they will too. I also want to give a special thanks to our community members who shared their voice with us in this episode. If anything in this conversation has resonated with you, or if you have any further thoughts or questions, I want to invite you to join our community of other people like you and continue the conversation at Enneagram5.com.